Avian Ben asked, how do you choose the right composition for a panel? Now, this can be super tricky. I have trouble choosing, drawing a good composition for every panel. Because, every single panel you draw is very diverse. And it really just depends on what you're trying to show in your panel. Like, what's the idea you're trying to convey to the reader? What's the emotion behind it? So I guess I'll get into some tips for choosing a composition when maybe you're stuck. So the point of composition in comics is the main point is to bring your reader from panel to panel and then on to the next page. So bad composition choices will be anything that throws your reader off the page prematurely, anything that traps the reader in a panel, or if it leads them to the wrong panel to look at. I've talked a little bit about this in my video about flow, so I guess go watch that if you want a little bit more information. So if you look into composition, you'll see a bunch of things like the rule of thirds and the golden ratio. Definitely look into those. They're everywhere. Like you can find them. Maybe someday I'll do like a visual talk about them where I actually draw out what I'm talking about instead of just working on my comics like this challenge. But anyways, so rule of thirds and golden ratio are great. Where you place your focal point of each panel is super important. It's very tough to describe this without having visuals to show. But basically you want your reader's eye to go from the focal point of your first panel to the focal point of the next panel, and so on and so forth. So placing those, they don't necessarily have to be on the pathway toward the next panel, because you can use leading lines or contrast or negative space to say you have your top right panel, the focal point is in the top right corner when you want to lead their eye down to the bottom left corner to the next panel. You can put your focal point up there as long as you have lines or shapes or something to lead the eye back down to the next panel. And like I said, contrast and negative space are super important. Leading lines are an A+ good way to lead the eye around the composition. It's so hard to talk about when I don't have visuals. So that's the overarching stuff. Just look into good composition. Always keep in mind that the point of your panel is to give the reader a piece of information and then lead them to the next panel for the next piece of information. So let that guide you when you're brainstorming different compositions. Right, so when you're sitting down to work on a panel or the layout of your page, it's really important to think of what are you trying to achieve? What is your focal point? Where am I sending the reader after this panel? Am I sending them to the next panel on the left? Am I sending them down? Am I sending them right or to the next page? If you have a weird page where it's not you don't want it to be read left to right, you're doing something you want it to be read in a circle or something. It's just good to keep in mind where you want the reader to go next and direct them that way. Another big thing to consider when you're planning out a panel design is what's the mood of this panel? What's the emotion behind it? Do you want it to be scary? If you want it to feel scary or uncomfortable, skewing the angle of the scene or making the antagonist or the evil scary thing or whatever look larger and spookier. If you want something to feel really calm and serene, maybe doing a really balanced composition will work to your advantage there. Because you can learn a lot about the psychology behind framing and composition. Just the angle that you show your character. If you say have your camera below and you're looking up at the character versus having your camera above looking down at the character can really change the emotion behind a panel or a scene. Really consider that when you're planning out your composition. And another important thing to consider is the size of your panel. Is it big? Is it small? If it's small, you might not be able to put as much visual information in, whereas if it's a big one, you can add a whole bunch of different elements into it and make that composition really juicy with details. The important thing about when you're planning out a panel is to know what you want to show. What's the most important piece of this panel that needs to be conveyed to the audience, whether it's emotional stuff, a character reaction, important object, mood, whatever. Make sure that you showcase that thing as clearly as possible. And then make sure that your reader can get to the next panel you want them to look at. And like I talked about in my flow and page layout video. There's some really easy things you can do in your compositions, like making your character look to the next panel or point to the next panel. Use your word bubbles and the tails on your word bubbles to like point your reader in the right direction. There's a lot of simple hacks you can do that way. My best advice is to just try a bunch of different compositions if you're really not sure. You know, always iterate on your designs. Your first one will probably not be your best design. So do like, 3 to 5 if you're really stuck. Try dropping them into your page and see if they lead your reader to the right place. I hope that helps. I know it can be super tricky. A lot of the time I will, when I'm thumbnailing, have to redo it a whole bunch of times. I'll even, when I'm at the penciling stage, be like, oh, this panel doesn't work. Why didn't I see this? And, scrap it and start over and redraw the panel. There's nothing wrong with doing it a few times, trying out different things before committing and inking. So do your best. I wish you luck. Thank you so much for listening. If you have any questions about writing or art, I will be handling all the art questions. Bones handles all the writing questions, but his videos take a bit longer to make. Let us know if you have any questions. Leave a comment down below. It's been so long since I did a video because last weekend I recorded 7 videos worth of audio and then just did the drawing every day. So I'm I haven't done my spiel in a week. Whee! Anyways, thanks for watching. Goodbye!